what is this now? Indictment 3, 4, 5, 6, impeachment number 7. I mean, it's gotten to the point to where people, quite frankly, are numb to it.
I know the president has called this a witch hunt. You just laid out several examples of that. Any other thoughts that the president has communicated to you in terms of why this is going on and then why he calls it a witch hunt?
I think a witch hunt is really the way that anybody should describe this, because it's not something we've seen in our time. This is not even political. This is beyond that. A witch hunt is when you relentlessly attack your opponent, when you relentlessly attack the thing that you are most afraid of. People are afraid of somebody that cannot be bought by Washington. People are afraid of somebody who is independently wealthy and who has given up his good life to fight for this country. And that frightens a lot of politicians who are career politicians, unfortunately, because he'll get back there, and I know he'll be fighting for every one of us so that this doesn't happen to us.
And that's where it's being tried, in the most Democratic district in the United States of America, the most anti-Trump district in the entire United States. That's where the trial is scheduled to be held by a judge who has a very questionable background. She worked for years for a firm that's highly questionable, the David Boies firm, very, very Democratic-oriented. They represented
She was working
day for America, and it was also very sad driving through Washington, D.C. and seeing the filth and the decay and all of the broken buildings and walls and the graffiti. This is not the place that I left. It's a very sad thing to see it. When you look at what's happening, this is a persecution of a political opponent. This was never supposed to happen in America. This is the persecution of the person that's leading by very, very substantial numbers in the Republican primary and leading Biden by a lot. So if you can't beat him, you persecute him or you prosecute him. We can't let this happen in America. Thank you very much.
So guys, here I am making a video on Thursday night talking about an indictment that occurred on Thursday afternoon and releasing the video on Friday. However, I have been keeping up with this, just not exactly as active as you might would think. Now guys, I've been doing a lot less pure political videos. I did do one the other day and released it. It was about the Tim Pool versus the DeSantis Twitter bots. I'll leave that in the description box for you guys. But a lot of things to talk about here, but I'm going to try to make this as clear and concise as I can. So Donald Trump was indicted again. Obviously, this is not exactly a good thing to do, especially given the fact that you are in power right now, that rather being the Democrats, and you are going after your primary opponent this coming fall, especially given the fact that the polling data that you're seeing here shows Trump pretty well tight and even beating Joe Biden in some of these polls. So you're automatically getting the impression here that, yeah, you're just going after your political opposition, but don't worry, we'll get more into that here in this video as well. So we got the New York case, which, by the way, I talked about before, how it is that they decided to take 37 separate misdemeanors, put them inside one felony. By the way, that particular case fell 2 years outside the state statute of limitations, but they're going to convict him in that state anyways, only for then turn right back around and get reversed on appeal. There's the Georgia case, which, by the way, we'll talk about a little bit more later on in the video. And then, of course, you've got the Mar-a-Lago case, of which, by the way, the President of the United States can basically declassify anything in the world that he wants. And also, at the same exact time, he's got the Clinton sock drawer case. But they're making this case that he waved some piece of paper around, told people he didn't declassify. It doesn't really matter, because now we got ourselves another indictment. This time, over 1-6. So, apparently now... protesting or objecting to an election, even though we're not exactly allowed to talk about 2020, even though actually YouTube did actually remove some of the provisions on that. I'm not really going to get too deep into that because I don't think it really matters, but however, what does matter is the First Amendment of the Constitution. So basically what's happening here is that the prosecutor here, Jack Smith, which by the way we'll talk about a little bit more here in a second, as well as the 12th Amendment, as well as the takes that have came out here recently that seem to suggest that this entire ordeal will probably end in a conviction, but yet then turn right back around and be overturned on appeal. And we'll talk about the timing of this, because the timing is quite frankly pretty daggone peculiar, especially seeing how the 4 charges that they're going for have all been litigated. They were litigated in the second impeachment trial. But don't worry, we'll get to all that here in a second. So let's go ahead and start with Jack Smith. Jack Smith is a prosecutor who at one point in time had serious ties to the Obama administration. Obviously, he's still at the DOJ, the Biden DOJ, so obviously the ties are still there. Jack Smith has got a history for one particular case. It was the Bob McDonnell case back, I think, 2013-14 time frame. The former governor of the state of Virginia. Yeah, he tried to prosecute him on some type of charge that's kind of falls into the same vein of what they're trying to get Trump on. But then, for whatever reason, when McDonnell appealed the case, he appealed the conviction. The Supreme Court, which by the way at that time was much more liberal, they rejected Jack Smith's case outright 7-2. It was 8-1, something like that, basically overturning the conviction. Just so that way you guys can know that Mr. Smith here is not exactly competent. And if you actually look at the the provisions and the charges, the things that they're trying to get Donald Trump on, a lot of these things don't stand to scrutiny, as I'll explain. But first, we got to talk about the timing. So Biden is getting exposed every day, more and more of the corruption. We've all known that Joe Biden was corrupt. We all know that he's a very weak, feckless president. We already know, some of us, of course, know that he's not really and truly fully in charge. And then this entire thing come out today on Breitbart, where apparently he met with Obama, and Obama explained to him, don't worry, I'll leave the article in the description box, that you're actually strengthening your political opposition, which at this moment in time is the guy that you're trying to have locked up. Donald Trump, of course. Now, I've already given you guys my reasons why it is that I backed him in 2016 and 20, and why more than likely will back him again in 2024. I do not hide that about me. But the thing is this right here. You guys see that polling data I showed earlier, how it is that he's actually soaring in the primary and he's actually beating Biden in some polls there? It makes the entire thing look political. Makes people think that maybe what's going on is that a lot of people out there are waking up. Funny how it is that a very, very bad economy and only getting 12 hours a week at a job will actually do that. Funny how that is right now the military is talking about another draft, and we have a completely incompetent leader who wants to send people to Ukraine to fight Russia. It's funny how things like that right there will change some people's minds. Of course, it's also very, very funny people change their minds, especially when they finally realize that, we voted for this right here, but then in reality we didn't get what we voted for, when in reality they did get what they voted for, because they voted for the open border policies and all that stuff there. Don't worry, we'll talk more about that at the end. But the thing is this right here. This entire thing seems fishy, as you guys will see.
Coordinated to take the heat off Biden. This is the third time this has happened. You ready? On March 17th, Hunter admitted the laptop was his. And on the very next day, Trump received word Alvin Bragg was indicting him in New York. On June 8th, an FBI document broke that Ukraine paid Biden a $5 million bribe. And the next day, on June 9th, Biden's DOJ indicts Trump on the Mar-a-Lago documents. Yesterday, on July 31st, a Biden insider told Congress that Biden spoke with Hunter Biden's business partners dozens of times, and Hunter was paid handsomely to get his dad to fire the prosecutor in Ukraine. And then today, August 1st, Biden's Justice Department indicts Trump on January 6th charge.
Right there was Jesse Waters the other night, who perfectly outlined the what's going on here. It seems to me like anytime something comes out on Biden, they say, indict the man, indict Donald Trump, indict him. By the way, these indictments seem to me like they're just things being shot from the hip. They, for the most part, end up falling apart under further scrutiny. As I've said before on the New York case, the Alvin Bragg case, that entire thing falls 2 years outside the state statute of limitations. So while they will get a conviction in that case because it's New York City, more than likely will occur is that it'll just get overturned on appeal. Which brings me to Alan Dershowitz. You see, Alan Dershowitz recently went on Megyn Kelly, and he said that he would actually represent Trump if needed. If I was Trump, I actually would call Alan Dershowitz, because Alan Dershowitz got famous for one thing and one thing in particular, appeals. So he went on his show, and he talked about the fact that he felt that they would, of course, get the conviction like they will get in the New York case, but more than likely it will go straight to the Supreme Court, and it will, in fact, get overturned. Now, guys, the first part of this, he went on Glenn Beck earlier, right after he released that video. I'm going to play some of this for you, and then we're going to come back, talk a little bit more, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about it in the second half. Let's go ahead and roll this. Relatively lengthy, about 4 minutes long. Make sure you guys...
Author of Get Trump and the Price of Principle and host of The Dersh Show. Alan Dershowitz joins us now. We would love to understand, Alan, what exactly is Donald Trump being charged with in this latest indictment?
The basic charge is that he personally knew he had lost the election. He believed that he had actually lost the election fair and square, and he engaged in all these actions with a corrupt motive. I don't think the government's going to be able to prove that. There is no.
First of all, let me tell you something. I talked to Donald Trump probably about 2 weeks before January 6th. There is no way he believed he lost that election. There's still, today, he does not believe he lost that election. I can guarantee it. You know him well enough to know that.
He believes he won the election, and he believes it was stolen from him. I think he's wrong. Many people told him he was wrong. Many people are quoted in the indictment telling him he was wrong, but that doesn't make the crime. The crime requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he himself actually knew and believed it and acted with a corrupt motive. I don't think the government's going to be able to prove that. But to state a broader point, when the Attorney General of the United States authorizes an indictment, as was done here, against the man running against the incumbent president, who is now tied 44-44 in the New York Times poll, that indictment better be the strongest indictment in American history. There should be a smoking gun, fingerprints, a videotape, and a confession. This document is so flawed, is so filled with speculation. Jack Smith's famous for bringing speculative cases and then being smacked down by appellate courts. This just doesn't satisfy the Banana Republic test. In banana republics, presidents prosecute their political opponents. And the stronger their political opponents are in the polls, the more likely they are to be prosecuted. And we don't want that to happen in the United States. And I think this indictment doesn't meet what I call the Nixon standard. The Nixon standard is Nixon's crimes were so obvious that even his political supporters favored his being impeached or being prosecuted. That's not the case here. Right now, the only people who seem to support this indictment are partisans who are anti-Trump, and that's just not enough to heal the divisions in this country. So this indictment will further the divisions, and especially if it's ultimately reversed on appeal. Look, the indictment is brought in the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia jury will convict anybody named Trump for anything, and that's why the case should be moved to Virginia. It will be subject to a motion to change the venue to Virginia, where you have a level playing field. It's a purple state. This case should be tried in a purple state, not in a bright, a Democratic state. And that's where it's being tried.
Now, there's one thing that does need to be said. Okay, so one of the things that they're trying to do is they're trying to say that Trump is defrauding the American people, where he did, in fact, defraud the American people. Now, Glenn Beck was not a pro-Trump guy in 2016, okay? He did not become more of a pro-Trump guy until Trump was in office. Right around 2018 when he decided to change his tune. And it was right around Christmas, because I remember this because he actually talked about it on a show, I think on December 28th to December 29th, about the 2020 election. And like I said, I'm not really going to dive into that right there because I have no idea what YouTube... And they say that they have relaxed the talk about what happened, but I still don't trust it. The thing is this right here. Glenn Beck was saying then that Trump actually felt like he had really and truly been robbed, okay? Regardless of whether you agree with it or not, that's up to you. You guys leave it in the comment section. It's okay with me. I'll listen to you guys' arguments. But the thing is this right here. Dershowitz is basically saying that they're trying to say that he knowingly misled the American people, knew that he had actually lost, and figured he would continue to go through with the chaos. I find that hard to believe, especially given the fact that he won't shut the hell up about it today. And I'm a Trump voter, and I'm telling you, dude, please stop talking about it. Move on, move forward to 2024. I find that hard to believe. But questioning an election is now suddenly illegal in these people's eyes. You know, guys, this is only about a minute long, minute 15 seconds. But make sure you guys pay attention, because if I remember correctly, Democrats are used to doing this.
They say that publicly, it's clear.
You can run the best campaign. You can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
He knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did.
Votes remain to be counted. There are voices that were waiting to be heard.
And I will not concede.
And I respect where you're coming from, and I respect the issues that you're raising. You're not answering the question. Do you think it was...
I am. No, what I'm not doing...
You're not using the word legitimate.
There are still legitimate concerns over the integrity of our elections and of ensuring the principle of one person, one vote.
I agree with tens of millions of Americans who are very worried that when they cast the ballot on an electronic voting machine, that there is no paper trail to record that vote.
But constantly shifting vote tallies in Ohio and malfunctioning electronic machines which may not have paper receipts have led to additional loss of confidence by the public. This is their only opportunity to have this debate while the country is listening, and it is appropriate to do
that. Little bit, by the way, guys, did not include the 2000 presidential election. Now, it's funny that we're talking about Dershowitz because Dershowitz is actually a lib. He still voted Democrat in 2020, but yet he's still very much a lawyer. He's one of the best lawyers in the country, actually, even at his age, especially when it comes to appeals, which, by the way, is more than likely how all of these cases, including the Mar-a-Lago case, is going to end up turning out. It's going to end up going to appeal and then eventually getting overturned. Now, he mentioned, I think in the second segment, he may have mentioned there, I need to go back and double check, but he mentioned getting out of D.C., which, by the way, is extremely liberal, 97% Democrat vote, by the way. He mentioned the fact that he needed to basically get the case moved to Virginia or West Virginia. It more than likely won't occur, especially given the fact that the judge in this case actually worked with Hunter Biden's old law firm where he worked at. And, of course, given the fact that this particular woman is kind of like the toughest, the hardest when it came to the 1-6 protesters, the people who were actually at the Capitol and just walking around waving flags and stuff. Yeah, she's basically giving them the max sentence. Now, there's something else, too, that needs to be said, though, okay? And I wanted to bring this up before we go to the next part. One of the things that was missing there was the 2000 election protest. You see, when George W. Bush won in 2000, I know people are going to argue about this from there, too, but you're not going to change my mind on this one because Dershowitz obviously believes that Gore won that election. The problem is this here. In every single recount that they did in Florida, in the three main counties, the main county that they were looking at was Broward County. Bush never actually trailed. As a matter of fact, in some of those counts, his votes actually went up. And of course, you got hanging chads and all that stuff there. And apparently, you got Jewish voters voting for Pat Buchanan somehow or another, who, by the way, was he didn't exactly have the best views on Israel at that time. But apparently, that right there was the case. And of course, they oftentimes love to say that third party candidates don't sway elections, but yet Al Gore would later on go on to blame Ralph Nader. Also, somebody else who would blame Ralph Nader was Michael Moore, who coincidentally voted for Ralph Nader. Fact of the matter is, I completely disagree with Alan Dershowitz on this case. So I want you guys to know I'm not bringing this from a completely biased source. The man is still very, very much a lib, but I got to give the man credit. He's a pretty damn good attorney. Which brings me to this next situation.
And that's where it's being tried, in the most Democratic district in the United States of America, the most anti-Trump district in the entire United States. That's where the trial is scheduled to be held by a judge who has a very questionable background. She worked for years for a firm that's highly questionable, the David Boies firm, very, very Democratic-oriented. They represented Hunter
She was
Biden.
working... Right, and Burisma, and she was working there at the time of all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Not
and,
saying that she was
David
involved
Boies,
in it, but...
Right. David Boies and his firm have been charged with more cases of corruption and disbarable conduct than any law firm in modern American history. And it's well known for its being subject to so many charges. And she was part of that firm. And that's not something I would brag about. I got that firm disqualified in a case because of a conflict of interest. And they've been charged over and over again with conflicts and other kinds of things. And she spent most of her career in that firm. So if I'm Donald Trump, I don't want to be tried in front of her. I want to be tried in front of a judge who has a fairer and better background. And I want to be tried in front of a jury that isn't 90-something% anti-Trump voters.
Can he get that done?
He can try, and if he loses, it will be subject to appeal. And that might be the kind of thing that could be appealed immediately as well. There's some dispute about that.
Right.
But change of venue motions can sometimes be subject to what are called interlocutory appeals. So there's a lot that will happen before he stands trial in the District of Columbia in front of
You
this.
see, guys, it looks to me like what the hell is going on here is that it's just another indictment. It's just another charge. After a while, it just gets numbing. This is where I do disagree with Alan Dershowitz on to a certain degree, because the divisions in the country have already been exploited. The divisions, in my personal opinion, began really halfway through the Clinton administration. There was a bit of a tenuous piece there between the right and the left. And then, of course, Bush comes into office. Democrats, of course, protest. We get through there. We go to Iraq and Afghanistan. You guys can complain about that in the comment section all you want to. I tend to answer to people who say that the WMDs were not found there, even though in reality at that time we called them NBC weapons, nuclear, biological, and chemical, and WMD for the most part really refers to nuclear, but yet they often leave out biological and chemical, which, by the way, are just as bad, if not more dangerous, especially in certain settings, which we do know that Saddam had. But then again, though, you guys, we can argue about that in the comment section if you want to. I typically tend to look at these people and tell them that I'm proud of my service in Iraq, and quite frankly, I don't regret a single thing. And in reality, I don't regret a single thing. I don't regret going at all. I don't regret going twice. But still, though, at the same time, though, obviously, certain things that got brought up at that point in time, in my personal opinion, I think people were fighting. And they had a right to be concerned. Of course, I'm not saying that they were wrong. Obviously, we have the ability to disagree with one another and call out things that we think are BS. Obviously, I do that here on this platform, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys have done the exact same thing. So I'm not coming out here and beating up on anybody over that. However, that right there being said, you then get to Obama. And, of course, Obama comes in. He's on the rise. You just had the situation with the bank bailout. You had the whole situation with TARP, all that type of stuff there. And then, of course, the divisions in the country really and truly began to show when he was in office. Every time he turned around, he tried to divide the country by way of race. And then Trump comes around, and Trump, he looks at the divisions, and he realizes that certain things obviously need to be called out. And then people start saying he's dividing the country. However, what we do know for sure is that Joe Biden is, in fact, dividing the country more and more and more, because obviously Joe Biden wants to imprison his political opposition. And how is it that they actually plan on doing this? Well, they've been wanting to use the 14th Amendment. You see, apparently there's this provision in the 14th Amendment that basically says that we can get you removed from the ballot, and only 2/3 of a congressional vote can save you. Meaning that if the Democrats get what they want, they can get Trump removed from the ballot, and therefore he can't run for office and all that stuff there. But that little bit of scrutiny, that's kind of falls apart when you actually look into the 14th Amendment and actually talk to people who've actually practiced law. You see, the thing is this right here. Trump would not get 2/3 in favor or 2/3 against. Republicans don't have that much of a congressional vote. And I actually look at Democrats and I'm like, you know what? If you really and truly think that you can beat Donald Trump and you're doing all these indictments so that way you can make him the nominee, then why not just go ahead and face him toe-to-toe? Why just go ahead and face him mano-a-mano? You can win, right? Obviously, these people cannot do that, or else they would not be doing this. Or maybe they're trying to recreate the Pied Piper strategy of 2016, which, by the way, completely backfired on Hillary Clinton, and the economy is obviously much, much worse today. But then you get to somebody like, say, Robert Barnes, who's actually done some research on this and has actually practiced law. Make sure you guys pay very close attention to the next 4 minutes.
What's taking place?
Posthumous impeachment, Robert. Posthumous. Remove them from the ground and impeach them again. All right. The January 6th indictment at the federal level, I mean, is this more of the same? This has to do with Trump participating, I guess, in seditious conspiracy. Right. Robert, they're going to try to get him off the ballot. I know you don't think it's possible.
I'm not.
Okay, I mean,
but here's why. There's first of all, there's several different reasons. My main reason is a simple one. The probability that secretaries of state and that courts go along with removing Trump from the ballot in close or conservative states is just extremely low. Why do I say that? They've never done it in American history. So even when Eugene V. Debs was convicted of espionage against the United States, he was on the ballot throughout the United States. Outside of those southern states, they didn't allow anybody on the ballot, but excluding those, he was on more ballots than he'd been on any time before for the president, and he was in prison at the time.
Robert, we've crossed the Rubicon, however. We're beyond the Rubicon. It's never been done is the best argument for that. It will be done this time around.
Look, same with Victor Berger. Victor Berger, co-founder of the Socialist Party with Eugene Debs, congressman from Milwaukee. indicted also on the Espionage Act. Both of them indicted because they gave speeches against the draft and against the war, World War I. It was a clear abuse, obviously, of federal power. Last real time we saw it to this scale was World War I. It's also when J. Edgar Hoover rose up and so forth. And he too was convicted, and yet he kept getting reelected. And here's why. Even if you want to take a crazy interpretation of the 14th Amendment and that it still applies, the first problem is the 14th Amendment only talks about holding office, not running for office. Two very different things. That's why they tried to keep Gosar off the ballot, Marjorie Taylor Greene off the ballot, Madison Cawthorn off the ballot. They failed on the same 14th Amendment argument. They failed in all three cases. And they've never successfully in American history kept someone off the ballot on 14th Amendment grounds. The only relevant charge, which means you need a conviction on espionage, a conviction on insurrection, which, by the way, the statutes they're talking about for Trump on the January 6th charges are not insurrection charges. And for those that don't know, the definition of insurrection at the time that 14th Amendment was passed requires engaged in violence against the authority of government. You have to have been engaged in it.
Yeah,
the aiding and abetting part only applies to enemy of the government. That has been traditionally limited to times of war.
Well, has engaged in violence been limited to physical acts with the body, or can that include words out of the mouth?
No, it has to be physical violence. So it can't be verbal. It has to be literal violence against the people. That was the interpretation of insurrection. That's why the 14th Amendment was considered limited. It wasn't going to apply to anyone that had not already taken an oath previously to them being involved in insurrection, and that the insurrection was actual violent action, not just political action. It was people who joined the Confederacy, not by voting, but were in the Army, Confederate Army. There was actual declaration of war ultimately. The Civil War, same with World War I. We had an actual declaration of war, so that's what also made it different. But there's always been issues. So part one doesn't concern ballot access. It concerns holding the office. Second, guess what office is not listed? The presidency of the United States. It says the Senate, the House, electors for the presidency, and then any other officer. And in that context, as the state of New York admitted in what they were trying to fight the removal action, that when that's the phraseology, the Supreme Court has made clear that does not include the president. The 14th Amendment explicitly excludes the president. And you can guess why, because there's a specific remedy for the president. It's called impeachment.
So you got some problems there. You got some major problems with that one there. It doesn't look to me like that one right there is going to work, especially seeing how a precedent has already been set. You see, that particular thing, like, locking up the president, making him ineligible to run for office, that's got to be done via impeachment, meaning he's got to be in office for you to do that. Meaning you also got to get 2/3 of the vote in the Senate to actually get a conviction, which, by the way, they never got in 2 separate attempts. So, nice try. I can already hear somebody saying, and this is going to be the final point that I make before I close this video, I can already hear somebody saying that what Trump wanted to do was illegal. He couldn't do that, even though they would come back out and try to re-strengthen the process so that way nobody could do that, which I think is going to be hilarious if the shoe was on the other foot in 2024. But it was actually one person who explained what was actually being done. He actually explained the legality. It was actually Van Jones.
Choose the president and the vice president. Federal law says all election disputes at the state level need to be wrapped up by December 8th so the electors can cast their ballots on December the 14th. Now, each state governor has got to certify the electors' votes and then send them on to Congress. So the results aren't official until the new Congress counts those ballots on January the 6th. Now, it's usually a straightforward process, but let's say one of the candidates questions the legitimacy of the state's count. The governor could choose not to certify the electors' votes, or, though this is really unlikely, the state legislature could decide to contest the election and send a different count to Congress, meaning Congress could end up with no results or with competing results from the same state. Now, that's a violation of federal law, so Congress would no longer have to honor that state's electors at all. Now, the House and the Senate can then decide which result is valid or throw out the votes from that state altogether. Now, I know you think I'm crazy, but this actually happened. It was 1876, shortly after the Civil War. Samuel Tilden won the popular vote, but there were 19 electoral votes in dispute. Congress had to step in and broker a compromise. Rutherford Hayes was eventually named president in exchange for the end of Reconstruction and the withdrawal of federal troops from the South. Here's where things get even more interesting. If a candidate still doesn't have a majority of electoral votes by the end of this process, the 12th Amendment says the House of Representatives decides who will be president, and each state delegation gets one vote. The Senate picks a vice president. No matter what happens, somebody has got to take the oath of office on January 20th.
So help me God.
If both the president and the vice president are still undecided, the Speaker of the House temporarily gets that job.
I'm just curious. Okay, I'm just curious. If Trump runs for president in 2024, like he's doing right now, and he wins, I'm just curious. What if he wins and Democrats try to use the exact same situation, exact same scenario to keep Biden in office? I'm just curious. Just very weird how that's going. This has already been a very long video, so let me go ahead and tell you what I think is going to happen. I think what's going to happen is that they're going to continue to indict over and over and over again. You're going to see the Georgia indictment. They'll try to indict him over something else because, quite frankly, you can indict a ham sandwich. They're going to keep doing it over and over and over again, and then they're going to turn right back around after they do that. And the only thing they're going to do is just make him stronger, because then they're just going to martyr him. As a matter of fact, the sheriff in Georgia, in Fulton County, has already said he wants the mugshot release, which I think would be absolutely hilarious, because then it would just be the best-selling T-shirt in the country. I mean, you're basically martyring the guy. So, yeah, I say, you know what, if you're going to keep this entire thing up, I mean, the only thing you're doing is just showing people just exactly how tyrannical you are, even though we already knew that you're tyrannical as hell. But then again, though, if you want to divide the country, just remember the vast majority of your voters, the vast majority of the people who want the Civil War, just remember that they mostly live in the cities, and they mostly live in cities that, quite frankly, you got to cross bridges to get in and out of. Not exactly a smart idea, but we'll talk about that in another video. With that right there being said, guys, I want to go ahead and close this one right here down. Guys, make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe, share the video, sound off in the comments section. I would love to get you guys' thoughts, and I shall see you guys later.